Welcome, everybody. My name is Nabil Fahel, and I'm the director of the Terminal Tech Talk series. I have the pleasure of introducing today's moderator and MC. But before I do, I wanted to mention a few things for the benefit of our live stream audience. If you have any questions for today's speakers, please put them in the chat box on the live stream page at terminal.io/livestream, and we will try to get to as many questions as we possibly can. For those not familiar with Terminal, we're a remote teams company where top engineers meet fast-growing companies. We bring global opportunities to your doorstep to help companies access the best talent wherever that might be. After all, talent is universal, but opportunity is not. If you'd like to learn more about job opportunities at Terminal, just head over to terminal.io/openings, where hiring is always on. I also wanted to give a special shout out to the amazing women at Terminal across the USA, Canada, Mexico, Colombia, and Chile. Today's topic is extremely important to us at Terminal. During this historic Black History Month, we made a donation to Black Girls Code as we continue to highlight the incredible and pioneering work of Kimberly Brandt. Internally, in our ongoing efforts to support more diversity in tech. Two of our speakers today are from Toronto, and we are also proud to have an office in the city, which is the most multicultural city in the world with over 200 ethnic groups and 140 languages spoken. Shout out to the six. Now, I have the pleasure of introducing everyone to Rayanna Samuel, today's moderator and MC. Ray is the University of Waterloo's Women in Computer Science Outreach Coordinator, where she manages the office's programs encouraging female, non-binary, and transgender youth in exploring technology and entrepreneurship. She works to bridge the gap between students and the professionals that they aim to be like in the future. In her role, she serves as the chapter ambassador for Technovation Girls Waterloo. The program encourages teams of youth to create an app to solve a social challenge that they identify. I met Ray a couple years ago as a part of our ongoing Technovation partnership, where we support her leadership locally with the Technovation Challenge. If you're not familiar with Technovation, their mission is to empower underserved communities, especially girls and women, to become innovators and creators of technology and engineering. Technovation makes girls feel as if they have a place at the table and helps empower girls by exposing them to role models like today's speakers. It's been awesome working with you, Ray, to bring this program to life. And without further ado, I'll pass it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nabil. This event was just as fun to work on, if not even more fun than the last one. And I'm really excited to continue collaborating with you and the Terminal team on future endeavors. But let's get started with our event. Before we jump right into everything, I do want to begin with an acknowledgement of whose land we're on. We're chatting about equity in tech, and so much of that comes with looking at the past and understanding where we've come from so that we can improve as we move forward. So part of that is acknowledging the various groups that we interact with. So let's start with the land acknowledgement. I will be doing one for Waterloo, Ontario, which is where I am today. So I'd like to acknowledge that we will be addressing the importance of equity in technology and how we can better achieve equity on land situated on the Haldeman Tract. This land was promised to the Haudenosaunee of the Six Nations of the Grand River and are within the territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. Today, as Nabil has alluded to, we have a fantastic panel on why equity in tech is so important and the impact it can have on its users and the community at large. We'll get started with some introductions, move on to some questions that I have, and incorporate some audience questions as we go. To make it easier for our team to track the questions coming in, I ask that you keep the chat conversation related to what we're chatting about. Now, let's turn our attention to our panelists. Thank you so much for joining us, Desi, Dominique, and Tara. I'm going to do a brief intro of all of you because you have fantastic backgrounds that the world deserves to know about, and then we will jump into questions. So with me today is Desi Daskalov, who studied engineering at Queen's University before working as a software developer at Eloqua. But Desi knew that from a young age, she'd create something all her own and being an entrepreneur. And in 2012, that's just what she did when she became one of the co-founders and CTO of Nudge, helping employers better connect with and support their employees to understand their needs so that they can grow together. Something that's really important as we've become distant because of the pandemic. We also have Dominique Simino-Ricci, VP Engineering at Wealthsimple. Dominique is known for creating inclusive spaces for her engineering teams, boosting morale, productivity, and innovation. It's what has made her a success at companies like Shopify, BlackBerry QNX, and IBM. In a previous role with Lever, she was able to build an R&D team with 40% of engineers identifying as women or non-binary, a win for equity in tech. And finally, we have Tara Chudlovsky, whose passion for showing just how accessible AI is led to the founding of Technovation, where she is CEO. Hopefully that name sounds familiar because Technovation is the parent organization of Technovation Girls, a program I'm so proud to champion as the Waterloo chapter ambassador. Tara's love for sharing AI does not stop there. She's led the 2019 education track at the UN's AI for Good Global Summit and the Global Partnership on AI for Humanity. Three really outstanding examples of why connecting people to tech and putting them at the forefront of technology innovation and design is so important to progress. So now that we know a little bit of your background and how you got here, let's find out a little bit more about where you currently are. So starting with Desi, please share what your journey to today looked like. Feel free to go as far back as you'd like, and what your current role entails at Nudge.
Wonderful. Hi, everybody. Really great to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I will give you guys the short version of the long story. So going back, Ray mentioned that I was born in Bulgaria, and I actually moved here with my family when I was 7. I may not say exactly when that was so that I don't date myself. But when I first came to Canada, my dad and my mom really did a great job of making us feel very lucky that we were here, and they created this discussion around we have this immense opportunity that we can really tackle, and we're so fortunate and lucky to be here, so why not make the best of it? And my dad actually talked a lot about entrepreneurship from our early childhood days, and obviously that kind of stuck because both my brother and I are now tech entrepreneurs. So kind of growing up drinking that Kool-Aid, I studied engineering at school and decided that one of the good ways to become an entrepreneur would be to learn how to build something. So I studied engineering at Queen's, and then I worked for 3 years at a couple different software companies in Toronto where I had really wonderful experiences. And actually at one of them is where I met my now co-founder, Lindsay. So the two of us at that point in time, I was still relatively early in my career, like out of school, 3 years out. I met my co-founder. She had come up with the idea for what is now Nudge through some of her consulting experience. And she even had a couple early customers on board. And we partnered up and started building the product and the business together from that point forward. So what we do at Nudge now, and similar to what our journey was from the beginning days, our value prop is actually, strangely, in this crazy COVID time, the most relevant that it's ever been. So we work with companies that have lots of frontline employees in retail, food service, hospitality, and other verticals. And we empower those employees with all of the information that they need to know in their day-to-day jobs, and we connect them to their other coworkers and their company through a mobile app. And when we give those employees the tools that they need to do their jobs, they end up doing even better at their jobs because we believe that everybody foundationally wants to do a really good job, and that reaps all kinds of benefits for themselves and for the company as well. So starting Nudge several years back to now, we at this point have raised a little bit over 20 million in funding Canadian. We have customers in the US and Canada and also globally as well. So we're starting to do a lot of global expansion, which has been really exciting for us. And most importantly, we've also grown our team. So we've done a lot to invest in our team and our culture, and we're really, really proud of the team that we have. So yeah, currently the CTO there, and started by writing the first lines of code and then kind of didn't let go of code for a while. But now I'm working with our engineering and data teams to bring our product to life.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much for sharing, Desi. And really cool that the conversation of entrepreneurship started so early for you, because that's not something that that you always hear about or that you always see. You always hear the stories of, well, it's not something I've ever really heard of. So it's really cool to hear a story that leans on the other side of that. So thanks for sharing. Dominique, I'm coming over to you next. Where did it all start for you, and what does life today at Wealthsimple look like?
Yeah, so I'm very fortunate. I grew up with computers, and now I'm going to date myself. I grew up with computers before the internet. And essentially, I had to learn how to code in order to chat and play games and meet people and connect with them. And so that exposure is really what led me into computer science. And I'd say it's also what kind of keeps me motivated and keeps me learning what comes next. So a theme in my career has always been that I'm always looking at the people around me, trying to learn about what they're doing, and it helps me develop awareness of what's possible for me, what I might enjoy doing, or what I could possibly learn. And by building relationships with phenomenal women peers and now executives, exchanging ideas and plans, it teaches me what I'm capable of. If a year ago you had told me that I'd be leading an engineering team at Wealthsimple, I would have said that it's not possible. There's no way that I could do this. But I was fortunate enough to have peers around me who were doing that and who I could exchange ideas with, and actually in some cases help and mentor them on their own problems, which taught me that I could do this right now. I became a leader and a manager as a result of being first a software developer, but always thinking about the bigger problem. I'm always thinking about how can I connect more people? How can I ensure that what one person is doing can help somebody else? And so that's really how I realized that I really wanted to lead teams and people. And today, I'm in this role. I'm in this amazing opportunity now at Wealthsimple. If you haven't heard of it, we are a financial services company, and our mission is to empower everyone to grow and manage their money, regardless of who you are and how much you have. We really want to help people invest for the future as easily as possible. And so my role there is to help the engineering team thrive. Ultimately, I look at what is standing in the way of our success, and I put in systems and also coach and mentor people to help them succeed. And in this great, amazing time, we also fundraised and raised a lot of money quite a few months ago. And so now we're looking at how we can scale both our teams and grow significantly, but our processes and our technology. We experienced 4 times growth just in the past month. And so we're constantly looking at our systems to see what we can do to make sure that we're ahead of the curve and ready for what's next.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Dominique. And really you highlighted a really great part of today's talk and the common thread between the three of you, and that was looking at the people and how they shape and affect the tech, and how you can shape and affect them to make better tech, which is awesome. And Tara, I'd love to hear about your journey and what it's like leading Technovation, which I didn't realize until you mentioned it the other day, has reached 250,000 girls with your programming, which is fantastic.
Yeah, thank you, Ray. It's been a really interesting journey for sure. So I am from India, and I think, like the other people on the panel, I'm also very lucky. My family was unusual in that they really supported girls, and my family is also unusual in that the women were the ones who were the main breadwinners. So my grandmother, and entrepreneurship is not a very common word, but business is. So my grandmother, at the age of 60, I believe, started her school. She cut down a tree, made a table, 2 chairs, hired her friend as a teacher, and started a school that is still running today. And then my mother joined, she was trained as a doctor, but she joined the army at the age of 43. And so having these incredibly strong women as role models has been always a big part of my life. But I wanted to be a pilot. I couldn't be because I was too short. I became an aerospace engineer instead. And of course, I came to the US to study, do a PhD. And a big part of what drove me to start Iridescent, which is now Technovation, was the sense of inequality and the sense of justice, where it was just by chance that I was born into a family that supported girls in a country where girls are not welcomed. It was just chance that I was born into a family that had more resources than others. And I feel like in the current day and age, that needs to change, where all children and all, regardless of your gender, need to have some degree of opportunity and education. And especially, and COVID has been, it has only intensified and shown us these inequalities. And so I was in a PhD program in aerospace engineering. I wanted to work in these companies, these aerospace companies. But when I came to the US and I saw, firstly, that women are so underrepresented in the tech field, in engineering, that to me was a huge surprise. And then also that even in a country that is so wealthy, people just don't care that there are lots and lots of homeless people, lots of people who are suffering. And that to me was very troublesome, that you ignore that. And so I started a nonprofit. It was a complete shift for me, complete shift in career. I had no background in education, but I started Iridescent 15 years ago with the mission to work very closely with tech companies, engineering companies, with mentors from professionals from these organizations, so that they could work with highly underrepresented communities and together tackle large, complex problems that cause so much human suffering. And the key idea there was that the mentors are learning as much as the girls and the recipients, or the mentees, and together you're building greater empathy, greater understanding of different communities, and a different way of being. And that's the heart of innovation, actually. And so we've reached roughly 1/3 of a million participants, because mentors and volunteers like yourself, Ray, are such an incredible part of our program. Without them, we cannot reach so many people in so many countries. My team is only like some 20 plus people. But yeah, I think the key idea of Technovation, or previously Iridescent, is that let's bring the most cutting edge, most powerful technologies that we have to the most vulnerable groups, because that's what they need to be able to thrive, so that they are part of these conversations, they are part of these groups where these innovations that affect their lives are taking place. So that's the core of what we are doing.
Yeah, and that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing, Tara. And really great that the three of you came from areas where you had access to a lot of things, and then you took it and you really ran with it. You didn't take it for granted, which is fantastic. So some would say that you've all been able to break a glass ceiling in some way, shape, or form at some point in your career. Would you agree with that statement? And if so, how were you able to do it? And if you maybe don't agree with it, how come? And we'll start with Dominique.
Of my journey, it's taken someone saying, yes, you can do this job. Yes, you can try this out. And so from my perspective, I definitely feel like I've been hired for potential in the past versus for what I'd already done, so that I'm constantly getting to learn in whatever job and whatever role that I'm doing. And I think that the way that I've done that has, you're not going to be surprised by this answer: relationships, relationships, relationships. So I talked already a little bit about mentorship, but it's also about exploring what's out there and building relationships with people, either in roles that I want or that could potentially provide me with that opportunity. And so even though I loved my previous job that I was in, I started saying yes to a couple of recruiters that had reached out to me for what seemed like a crazy, wonderful, like a VP role. How could I ever have this title? That is unbelievable to me. And then, and by the way, you don't need to wait for a recruiter to reach out to you. Even before this ever happened to me, I used to do something called informational interviews, where I would just reach out to somebody that I was admired and cared about and thought like, this is somebody that I could really emulate in a way, and ask them many, many questions about how they succeeded in their roles. And you can do that at any step of your career. And then so by talking to people like this, I was able to identify that this was achievable for me, and also what I needed to learn and practice. And being in a really supportive organization, I was at a company called Lever before, my leads just let me take more space. So I thought, well, what if I went beyond my scope? Okay, this is what I have to do in order to succeed. And I would just try it and do it and learn from my mistakes in that safe space that I was already in.
Yeah, that's awesome. And having that space to be able to do it is so important. And we'll chat a little bit later about how people are hopefully looking to create those spaces can start doing that. Tara, how about you? How would you say you were able to break the glass ceiling, or maybe you don't feel that was the case?
Yeah, I think I don't like the term that is used because it kind of implies that there's a ceiling, and I think I never, and in some sense it puts maybe even too much emphasis on the individual. For me, it's all about the problem. And there's a large problem that needs to be tackled. We got to devote all energy to that rather than think about my personal whatever titles and things. So I think that's how I approach it. But in terms of thinking about how do you make an impact, and how do you tackle a problem, I think choosing the right problem to work on is something that I encourage a lot of girls to think deeply about, because the problem should be rich enough for you to grow. Too often in Silicon Valley, I see a lot of entrepreneurs in a hurry to make money, to exit, and or get acquired, and the metric of success there is maybe money, and that to me is too low, because guess what, when you when you spend a lot of your life reaching that goal and you get that money, I mean, there's so much research to show that that doesn't result in happiness, then you have a midlife crisis. So I would encourage you to sort of think about a meaty, rich problem that actually helps a lot of people. And I think COVID has opened up so many problems that all of us need to tackle. I mean, climate change is one, but inequality and the lack of justice is a really, really big one. So I think we need the best minds to be tackling and thinking about this.
Totally shifting that focus from how can I get ahead and what can I do for myself to how can I contribute to the greater good of humanity, of the world I'm living in, maybe even just the local community I'm in, because starting small can have such big impact and really have a huge ripple effect, which I think you can see a lot of in Technovation Girls, because we get some really awesome students. And Desi, how are you able to make it to this point where you are today?
Yeah, so I think both Tara and Dominique kind of touched on this. So much of it is luck. I mean, for Tara, being in a family, being lucky to be born into a family that valued girls, and for Dominique, having people say yes, that really resonates with me. I think so much of it for me is being lucky to be in a family that brought me to this country and instilled in me, instead of, hey, we're going to struggle to make it here, hey, you have this really great big opportunity. So just shifting that mindset to such a positive way of thinking, I think was a lot of what kind of set me up for this career. And then just having someone tell me I could do it, and tell me I could do it over and over until I believed it, so that when the opportunity came, I was ready to take it. Another huge part of it really is just having the best co-founders I could ever imagine. My two co-founders, Lindsay and Jordan, are an incredible support group. We really support each other and pick each other up when things are tough. And often they are tough in companies when you're growing them over many years. So sometimes, I've said this to numerous entrepreneurs, sometimes companies survive just out of sheer willpower and refusing to die. And without co-founders and a community around us like that, I think it would have been really difficult to do that. So it's just really great to have amazing people around.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So Dominique, I'm actually this one's for you and Desi. Tara, I have a special one for you. But since you've been able to make it to this point, and you've mentioned that you started off with having this access and opportunities, and that you were able to build a community and a network that really set you up to be successful, how are you passing that on to other people so that there continues to be room at the table, and that we continue to see a variety of voices taking part in the conversation? And Dominique, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's so important to not just mentor people and give people advice, but to go above and beyond and sponsor them. Creating those opportunities is how you can really, really help set people up for success. So what I find exciting is like when I get exposure to somebody's passions and something that it may be in a frame where I can actually help them not just achieve that, but also elevate it and make it maybe meet and help more people than maybe they even thought was possible. And what people often don't realize about sponsorship, especially people who are in a position to do it, is that it's a two-way street. It actually helps leaders. Like, never be afraid to ask a leader for help and support on executing on one of your ideas. Because the thing is, for example, at work, I would love to, for instance, we're thinking of, there's somebody who came to me last week who said, I'd love to create a mentorship program where we can have Wealthsimple developers actually helping people outside of Wealthsimple. Can I do that? I was like, first of all, you don't need to ask me permission. But second of all, I want to help you do that because that actually makes me more successful. That makes Wealthsimple as a company more successful. It is absolutely like a two-way relationship where I benefit, Wealthsimple benefits, but then also that person gets an opportunity to learn and practice a new skill, which is to put together a program that anyone in engineering now can participate in.
Yeah, that's awesome. And Desi, for you, how are you continuing to have those conversations and create those spaces?
I think some of it, so I think as a society, we've done a much better job recently kind of sharing the trials and tribulations of underrepresented groups as they build their careers in tech. But I think one of the sides to it is, and what I try to do is just share the joy of the journey sometimes. And yes, it's going to be tough and it's going to be challenging, but I fundamentally believe that people are born to do hard work and they don't shy away from it if they're encouraged in the proper way. So I think some of it is just, rather than saying, oh, this is going to be so tough, there's going to be all these barriers you're going to face, how about shifting it slightly to, you're going to overcome these barriers and you're going to feel so proud and make a difference and build a community that's really going to ultimately change a small part of the world, which I think it's important to tell that side of the story as well, and that it's important to keep pushing. I think another way that I think about it is, when you're in a company, I think it's important to invest in the professional development of your team and the growth of your team, and really pay attention to underrepresented groups in particular, and do even sometimes small things like when you're around a table, making sure that all voices are heard. And if there's a quieter voice and a louder voice, that you're helping mediate and make space for the person who might be a quieter voice at first to share until they get more confident to kind of interject themselves. So it's little things like that, I think, that are important. At Nudge, we've also tried to formalize some of these things. So we started a diversity and inclusion committee in 2020. So we're looking at everything from recruiting, onboarding, day-to-day life at Nudge, and how can we continue to make space for everybody, and how can we allow everybody within the company to contribute and share how they really feel with respect to diversity.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think we've seen a lot of EDI, or known some places they're called DEI committees, that have come about, and I think they've really helped kickstart some really important conversations. But I think also made some organizations who have maybe said, we're fine, we're on track, we're doing well, to really stop and look at themselves and maybe how they're reflecting bias from society, or just personal bias, because everyone is biased in some way, shape, or form. So it's really great to hear that Nudge is doing that and encouraging those conversations and formalizing them, so they aren't just, or they go beyond, grassroots movements, and they really move into the formal structure of the company. Awesome. And Tara, for you, so Technovation Girls this year recently added AI into their curriculum. So the competition before never really dissuaded it, but it wasn't formally taught, because obviously Technovation is all about AI, and we have had girls in the past who've implemented it and used it quite successfully. But it's something that the organization has formally kind of taught on through another program, Technovation Families. What was the deciding factor in formally introducing it into Technovation Girls for this season?
Yeah, I think as I was mentioning, the core principle of the organization is less about the technology and the platform, and more that it's our responsibility to find what is the most powerful tool out there and to translate it to the community and to these girls. And so in 2018, 18 and 19, we ran the Technovation Families programs that especially for girls in low-income communities and developing countries, the parents are the gatekeepers to a lot of the opportunities that girls face. So you can't really encourage girls to pursue very high-risk careers like becoming an entrepreneur or going into sort of male-dominated fields without making sure that the parents are not on board. So that was a key part of why we ran Technovation Families. And AI is extremely powerful technology, which we see everywhere. It's in everybody's phone. It's in so many different systems being used around the world. But women, people of color, underrepresented groups are not part of the teams that create these technologies. So there's a real problem right there. And we see that about bias coming out in study after study, case after story after story. And so the only way to fix that is to make sure that there's representation and diversity of teams. And the way we do that is to actually educate the broader community about these technologies. And so, this year we started to introduce a little bit of AI into the curriculum. For the next season, it's going to be an even stronger part. I think the idea is that girls are creating and tackling such difficult problems. They need better and better tools. And one of my favorite examples from last year was a team from Spain. They created an app that analyzes the most popular songs for sexism and for violent language, like you have like the Bechdel test for movies. This is even better, but for songs. And the girls are talking about some of the most popular #1 songs in Spain have extremely violent language, like he beat her, but it's a kiss. So this kind of stuff, like we should not be having to listen to this and think it's entertainment. And so an AI kind of speech recognition software running on top of that could make that app even more powerful. So I think girls are tackling very, very important, difficult problems, and they need better tools. And I think, that's the reason why we want to make sure that we're bringing the most powerful tools to these girls.
Absolutely. That's awesome. And keeping them current so that the current issues that they're solving, they can do it the best of their abilities, which we really are seeing. And I'm surprised that there isn't already something that exists to scan songs, since there is something for movies. So big kudos to them for going through with that, because as somebody who works with kids, and music can be just great for the background, you're always so nervous to put anything on. So we always end up doing instrumentals or copyright-free music that is also instrumental, because you never know what's being said, and you never want to encourage those kind of messages, especially when you're trying to uplift and empower girls. Yeah. So that's awesome. Thank you for giving a little more insight to that, because we do have some Technovation girls joining us today, and I'm sure it's really great for them to hear a little bit more about the changes to the curriculum, and that they will keep happening. So hopefully get them excited for the 2022 season. Amazing. So moving on. So Dominique and Desi and Tara, you've all kind of touched on this already, but I'd like to speak maybe specifically to organizations who are still feeling stuck and don't know how to proceed and how to move forward in their conversation of equity. So we've seen a lot of research, in particular the McKinsey 2020 report showed that companies in the top quartile for ethnic and cultural diversity outperformed the lowest quartile by 36%. But there are still companies who maybe hesitate to get involved with the conversation, maybe don't know, because they're afraid that they'll do the wrong thing or they'll take the wrong step. So what advice would you give to any organization who's looking to meaningfully and impactfully make changes, whether that's in their hiring practices, but especially in their company culture? Because as we see a lot of the time, sometimes the recruitment process is looked at, but nothing changes within the organization. So you bring in all these really amazing people, and then they don't feel supported, they don't feel welcomed, and then they end up leaving. And it's kind of this cyclic pattern. So what advice would you give? And we'll start with Dominique. what advice would you give to companies who are looking to start that conversation? If you had to give them like 1 to 2 actionable items to just hit the ground running.
Well, I think first of all, the expertise is in the room. Go to the people that are there, that are already within your organization, and ask them specific questions and listen, truly listen. And don't try and solve it in that conversation. Save that for another moment. But really start by asking for the feedback and taking a moment to really think about it before you put anything into practice. And then there are some really simple but really helpful practices that you can put into place. So when it comes to meetings, for instance, notice who's in the room and who's not. So recently we had a big scaling effort at Wealthsimple, and I looked around the virtual now room, and I thought, these are people that I've seen before. I've seen them. We have a large team, and I haven't met everybody, but I've met almost everybody in this room. And so I put in place a practice where I asked people to designate somebody else to replace them the next week, because I knew that scaling was not going to go away, and I knew that this effort would last longer. And so that created space for more people to come forward. And lo and behold, a few of those people that came forward were from underrepresented backgrounds. And by making that space and also holding them accountable so that they have to learn, we were able to do that. And so that's just like one really simple practice. But then also, if you look at your meetings, Desi touched upon a really, really important practice. But if you think about inclusive meetings, you have to think about the voices that are not being heard, and also who has the load of making sure the meeting is ready, that there are notes, and that there are action items. And so setting up a rotating chair for every single meeting that you have to ensure that it's not always the same person that's taking responsibility for that. And what's amazing about this is that you end up not helping just these underrepresented minorities. You help everybody, because not every person is the same. Another practice that I have found extremely helpful is ensuring that all reading materials for a meeting are always provided 24 hours in advance, because some people like to take that deep time to read and to understand so that they feel more prepared to be able to participate and to provide feedback within a meeting in a setting like that. So there's a lot. Inclusion, ultimately is about helping people feel like they belong, but a lot of what you need to do is these tiny little actions, and they're not difficult, and they help everybody.
Yeah, awesome. Totally. Desi, how about you? You've touched on Nudge having an EDI committee, but maybe what are a couple of things that have come out of the conversations that team's been able to have?
Yeah, so I can tell you a couple specific things that we do even on the engineering team. So what we've done in the engineering team is when we're hiring, we try to consciously remove places where we can get false negatives from people, and often that will help create a better diversity through that. So what you can do, for instance, one thing that we do, this is really specific to engineering hiring, but when people are sharing code for our code portion of our interview, we get them to write in whatever code they're comfortable with, and we don't force anything on them or having to learn anything ahead of time, so that they come in and they're comfortable with what they're doing, and that we don't get a false negative because they're a little bit nervous. The other thing we've started to do is, Dominique touched on this a little bit within meetings, but even in hiring, we actually start to send the problem that they're going to be solving a couple hours ahead of time. And this is something new that we're doing, because we find some people can think in the moment and can think really quickly and can really reason about a problem and work through it. Other people really need that time to process it and need some time for themselves. So we've started to send it ahead of time to give those people the opportunity to do that and then come in feeling a little bit more confident. So I think the more that you can get someone coming in with positivity and feeling comfortable and feeling confident, the less likely you are to get a false negative. So those are little things that we've done in our actual interviews. We've also done, Dominique also mentioned this in terms of getting a lay of the land. We've done anonymous surveys. So we've polled our team anonymously on how they're really feeling a nudge. And we've also done AMAs where we're not forcing them to ask the question on the spot. All questions are submitted anonymously ahead of time. And we tell everyone we're going to answer every question that comes to us. And then we do an AMA. So that's been a helpful way to make sure that we're hearing voices from people who might otherwise not be comfortable acknowledging that it's them asking the question or that it's them answering a certain way. And then I think lastly, what I've really found, and this one takes a little bit more time and dedication, but I think is really important for a number of reasons, is when you have a team and you're building a team, taking the time to do proper one-on-ones with everyone and sharing places where you've had struggles so that they begin to trust you and start to share their own struggles. And then you can poke at specific things to make sure that they do feel included on the team, etc. So those are just a few ideas.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. All very tangible and easy to implement. And Tara, how about you? In building your team, you mentioned your team of 20, but it's a very core, well-run, well-working team. How did you build them, and what advice do you have for other people looking to really diversify?
I think we have two lenses, right? Like one is in the organization itself, which is small, but it's also looking at how girls fare when they're alum. We have about 6,000 alum who are now in the workforce. And also seeing the experience of women, but also women of color in the tech industry. And overall, so I think I have two things. One is time flies. And so even if you think that maybe 5 years is too much of an investment, for most companies, that's a short time frame. And I would say invest in the beginning of the pipeline, which is invest in supporting younger girls. Because right now there's real pipeline issue. I mean, there's just not that many women in computer science undergraduate classes, and then even less in the workforce. So I think as a whole, we have to invest in supporting girls and I think and mentoring girls to be real world problem solvers using technology and to show them the power of technology. So that's one. I think the second is sometimes it can be very, very hard to be that single voice. And especially if it's from a completely different perspective, which is what diversity stands for, it can actually be incredibly hard for that one person to bear the load of telling everybody else that we need to change. And I think that there has to be better training, not for the one woman of color, but for everybody else. And I think right now, interestingly, there's, as far as I can tell, there's no research showing this is an effective training that has enabled people to change their unconscious biases. I mean, there's a reason why it's called unconscious bias. And I think all the Black Lives Matter movement and all of the conversations and the DEI committees that are being set up because of that, I think it's a very, very good thing and is resulting in very good conversations. But I think it has to move to the next step when, if you're hearing, and I think Dominique talked a little bit about it, like really listen, because you're going to hear something that you're not going to like. And you're not ready to change. And so that's when there's conflict and the one voice gets thrown out because it doesn't fit with the overall culture. So I think this is where more numbers matter. And I think that's why it goes back to, we have to invest in the pipeline. And it doesn't take that long. I mean, in a few years, these women will come into your workplace. So I think corporations tend to have such a short quarterly type of mindset, and that has to shift if we want to make change in this problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it can't be overnight. It needs to be sustained and well thought out and done. Absolutely. Fantastic. So we have a couple of audience questions that I'd like to move on to. Our first one is, how do you solve a work team situation in which your ideas are not taken into account because you are the only woman and the youngest? So maybe we can start, we started with Dominique last time, so maybe we can start with Desi this time.
I think it's important to, if you have someone you can share that with, to bounce ideas off of them on how you can approach the situation differently. That helps. I think if that doesn't help and you feel like it is a cultural situation, then really formally saying, like, this is going to your manager and saying, like, this is how I feel, here's what I've tried to fix it. Here's some other ideas I have. How do you suggest this can be improved? But I think a lot of this does have to be you have to have a culture that will listen to that and then will try and make some changes there.
Absolutely. Dominique, do you have anything to add as someone who's led a lot of teams?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo, you definitely have to tell your manager and be specific. Mention situations and listen, but then also make sure that they hear you and they truly get that feedback. I think something that I've done successfully is to develop allies. So look at who potentially on your team could become an ally for you and build a relationship with them where you might feel comfortable telling them your ideas ahead of time and also telling them how you feel and then giving them opportunities, teaching them what it looks like to be an ally. So that might mean, oh, Dominique, you had this idea that we talked about in the hallway last time, and this seems like it would be relevant to this problem. And so they can amplify your voice by becoming that person. I mean, ultimately, though, I think it's important to recognize if you're in a team or you're in a company that is not going to support you, is not willing to do the work to help ensure. Because I've definitely been on teams in the past where they didn't understand. I felt like I was swimming against the current. And I think you will always thrive and you will always grow the most when people are there to support you and proactively help you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you mentioned creating an ally in amplifying their voice and modeling it, because I think what happens a lot of times is you have conversations with coworkers and things come up and ideas are kind of shared and maybe built upon, and somebody will maybe take that idea and run with it as their own, or they kind of roll it into the collective we, as I like to call it, and you lose that ability to kind of further build on those ideas, or further share your thoughts and your feelings, and you get kind of lost, and it can be discouraging when you're sitting in a meeting and you aren't being heard when you're trying to speak. Absolutely. And Tara, how about you? How would you go about tackling a situation like this?
I think one part of it is trying to become more specific. I think, as Desi and Dominic was talking about, where if it's a big thing that I want to really fight for and it's really important, then I take the time to talk to each person and slowly help them understand what I'm trying to talk about, hear their point of view, and build bridges, because people hate any kind of change. And so you really want them to understand what you're trying to push for. But these things, this amount of effort, it only makes sense when you're trying to push something big. And I agree with Dominic that I think you have to recognize whether the culture and the team is supportive and merits that type of effort. And I think the other part would be also, instead of making it too personal, I think you can also sort of align it with the major goal of the team. And so it helps people quickly see the connection. So a lot of it is like good sales techniques, but it's how you communicate, but it's assuming that everybody's there to support you.
Totally. But maybe drawing those connections a little more immediately, as opposed to assuming that they'll see the connections inherently.
Yeah, I think my advice in general is like, maybe don't immediately go to gender or as a reason, but I think because some of these things are just, we all need to improve as good communicators, and different modes of communication are evolving all the time. And I think starting from a point of like, okay, this person wants to believe in me, trust me, we're all working towards a goal. So starting with that positive mindset first, and then you can try to troubleshoot later.
Yeah, absolutely. And our second audience question before we kind of jump into a wrap up is, what does diversity by design mean to you? And Dominique, this time we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think a lot about this even from a product perspective. And so when when we're building products, we're building them for real people. And so what is it that we can do as part of our process, a part of what we're doing to make sure that it's accessible to everyone? So, first of all, we might consider, are there people in Canada that have older phones that maybe can't use your app if it's too large or if it takes up too much space? And how can we make sure that we test and have versions that can work on those phones? And then more than that, how can accessibility be part of the conversation? So what are the core flows that people need to end up doing and using, and making sure that those are accessible with different keyboard strokes or whatever it ends up being that makes it easier to use. And then even like beyond that, so beyond the technology, well, is it that our product is more accessible to more people in the community if we lower our fees, or if we make it such that it's no fees for specific people? And, we're known for having very, very low fees, and in some cases none. But like really thinking about even our business model to ensure that we're not excluding people by design. So by the fact that we've made certain decisions that seem to make sense on paper from a business perspective, but then don't help us reach our clients. We recently, and this starts like really early on, even before you think about the process and what you're building and the product itself, we recently did an analysis of our client diversity to think about how are we represented today? How many clients maybe are people of color, and what products are they using, and how successful are they? Are they having problems, or are they using them successfully in order to actually truly, get the financial freedom that they want when they retire, for instance? And I think that's like really important fundamental question that you need to ask really early on in the process.
Totally. Thank you for that. And Tara, diversity by design, what does that mean to you?
I think, it's a hard question for me because, this is the mission of the organization. It's not necessarily diversity, but bringing equality and justice. I think including young people in the conversation, because they think so differently. They have so much courage. They have no risk is too scary, which is kind of needed to balance like the maturity of like the typical age stages of life. So I think involving young people in the conversation, asking them what they care about, because there's so much ahead of us. So I think that's going to make your product innovative, but also realizing that they're moving beyond sort of national boundaries, right? Like I think involving young people from all over the world, especially girls, into your worldview is going to help you a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And Desi, diversity by design, what does it mean to you? How does it resonate?
I do like thinking about it from the product perspective, because that's really far reaching, and then also from your own company perspective as you build your community. So from the product perspective, often when you're building product, you're building user personas anyway. Lots of benefits to building user personas. I think it's interesting to build user personas and then take a look at, have I accidentally excluded a persona that should really fit in here and could get value from my product? And I think this kind of comes with some of the things Dominique was saying on lower fees, et cetera. And then from a community perspective, I think a lot of it is when you're building a company or a team or contributing to a team, I think it's looking at all aspects from recruiting to onboarding to day-to-day life, and really challenging yourself with, what can I do with the resources that I have? And then as a business, what can we do as a business with the resources that we have, and which steps can we take, and where can we invest?
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. And in our last 5 minutes, because we've had some really great conversations, but they can be hard to have because they impact so many. So I'd like to end on a lighter note, and a note where you all get to talk a little bit about yourselves for a minute. So starting with Tara, what is an achievement that you are proud of that you don't get to talk about often?
I'm working on my 3rd degree black belt.
That's amazing. I love that. That's awesome. Desi, how about you?
That's such a good one. I love that one. I don't want to go after that. So I was just gonna say, just building a company over many years and sticking with it and committing to something and really truly enjoying the journey, because I very much believe that a lot of it is about the journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dominique, finish us off.
I have 2 young kids that will eat almost anything I put on their plates. I grew hundreds of tomatoes last year, and my 5-year-old picked them all right off the plant to eat them. And my 3-year-old asked for seconds of asparagus last night. And I really fundamentally feel like I've done a lot to educate myself on food and then teach them. And so I'm very, very excited about that, because I do find that it's quite a challenge.
Yeah, that's amazing. They're excited about vegetables, so they can go on and educate others, which is awesome. Well, that is all the questions that I have. That is all we have from our audience. Thank you so much, Dominique, Tara, and Desi, for chatting with me today about what is really important topic and sharing how all of you in your own ways are making sure that not only are these conversations continue to be had, but that we're acting on the things that we're talking about so we can actually see change. And you're bringing more voices to the table while still being amazing voices yourselves at the table. So thank you so much for being wonderful and for joining us today. A big thank you to our audience, everybody tuning in. We appreciate you taking this hour to hang out with us yet again. For those of you who were with me in January, welcome back. It was nice to have a second hour with you. And if this is your first hour with us, thank you so much. Hopefully you'll continue to come out to these Terminal Talks. A really big thank you to Terminal and their live stream team. I have not had an opportunity to moderate panels in a way like this, so I really appreciate the opportunity and the support that you've given me to host these last two. They've been such a blast and such a big learning experience for me. A huge thank you to Technovation chapters, not just here in Canada, but around the world, because I know we have some of you joining us from all over the place. That's so amazing. You're halfway through the season. Keep going. You can do it. Your apps will be amazing. There will be a copy of today's recording sent to everyone via email. You can also find it on the same site that you registered with, as well as all of the awesome Terminal Tech Talks that Terminal has hosted in the past. Please stay connected with Terminal. Their socials are @jointerminal on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Keep up with Technovation Waterloo. Our handle is Technovation Waterloo. And you can also find Technovation Global through. So if you go through our following list, they've also always got really fun stuff posted up on there. But that is it for me. Ooh, we've got 2 minutes to spare. There's 2 minutes back to you. But that's a wrap. Thanks so much for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you at the next one.